Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this NLA webinar. I'm Peter Murray, I'm Curator-in-Chief at NLA, and today's event is part of our Projects in Practice series, which is a part of our Building Better programme. And in these sessions, we invite the project teams behind some of the most interesting projects in the capital to present technical aspects of their design, specification and delivery. And this masterclass supports our competency CPD programme. And today we have the team that delivered new Cooper Point Park Central North, a 24-storey residential building in Elephant Park at Elephant and Castle, and we are going to hear from them shortly about the different aspects of this particular project. But don't forget, you can actually ask questions of our speakers at the end, so do use the Q&A button to do that. So now I'm going to hand over to the team who's going to deliver the presentation today. And we have Andrew O'Donnell, who's Project Director at Orford Hall Monaghan Morris, Simon King, Director at Robert Bird Group, Nisha Gopal, Head of Facades Integrated Solutions Europe at Lendlease, and Russ Edwards, Head of Product and Residential at Lendlease. So Andy, over to you.
AHMM, we were architects. Robert Bird, we have Simon King. Some of the other disciplines, so ACOM undertook MEP and sustainability. Wintech, we're our facade engineers. Bureau Happold, we're our fire engineers. And in terms of New Cooper Point, the facade subcontractor was FKN, who are a German facade subcontractor. This project forms one of a kind of long continuum of collaborations between AHMM and Lendlease, not just in the residential sector, but also in education. And it's very much been about this project taking lessons learned from some of the previous projects that we've worked on together and applying them to this very significant regeneration scheme. So some of the key projects, this is an older one that we built with Lendlease. First Base were the developer in this instance, and this was all about off-site manufacture and maximizing the opportunities for DFMA. This is an older project, but certainly we're very interested in some of the kind of technologies which were used on this project and how they could then be applied to this tower at Elephant and Castle. And then a more recent project, this time Lendlease were developer and contractor, Surrey Lane in Wandsworth. This was a joint venture with a school project, more modest in scale, but it was very much about approaches to standardization, but also offsite manufacture. It's actually CLT structure within there. So they're two kind of key projects from the portfolio that brought ideas that we then applied to this kind of larger scheme. Now, the project can't really be understood without thinking about the wider master plan at Elephant Park. I'll just hand over to Russ to talk a little bit about some of the kind of wider ambitions of the master plan that the tower sits within.
Thanks, Andrew. Morning, everyone. Yeah, so I think most people will probably recognise where Elephant Park and the Elephant and Castle is within London, but I think a key point that many people don't necessarily appreciate is that it's a Zone 1 location. So it's incredibly close to London Bridge and Waterloo. We're talking 5 to 10 minute walk. The master plan itself is a 5-phase master plan, which is supported by 2 satellite projects, which are labelled on this diagram as Trafalgar Square and one the Elephant. And it replaced the Haygate estate, which was well known as a sort of problem estate, a sink estate. Indeed, many politicians have used it as a backdrop for various policy launches. And the master plan is really a partnership with Southwark, as many of our urban regen projects are. As you can see, the phases of the main master plan central to this diagram are based around Elephant Park, which is the large green space. In fact, the largest green space delivered in central London in over 70 years. And that space is used to retain most of the significant mature trees that existed on the previous Haygate estate. But really what the aspiration behind the master plan was to kind of repair some of the urban fabric. For those who are aware of the Haygate estate, it consisted of very large slab blocks, most of which were running north-south on the diagram in front of us. And, you know, certainly of architectural interest, but from an urban perspective, the ground planes were very unhospitable, very poorly connected, and the Haygate estate in general was considered lacking in porosity. So many of those historic street patterns had disappeared, and this master plan is really all about reconnecting them and indeed reconnecting the community with the ground plane in particular. Next slide, please, Andrew. So this is an aerial view of the main master plan. You'll probably recognize the strata building, which is the angular elliptical in plan tower. That's not part of our master plan. So our master plan really comprises the cluster of sort of tall buildings between, you know, circa 20 to 25 stories, interspersed with mansion blocks, which rise up to 13, 14, 15 stories in some cases. The height sort of builds towards the Elephant and Castle roundabout and the existing strata building, and indeed the the Elephant, which, as I mentioned, was a satellite project for this project. And you can see the new Cooper Point is identified more or less central in this image. Next slide, please, Andrew. Some stats around the master plan. I won't read all of these out to them, but just to pick out some of the key issues from a client's perspective. Skills and training was a key part of our offer to Southwark as a partner on this project. So we've established the Southwark Construction Skills Centre on site, and that's been a great success. We've been able to assist a huge number of the local community in developing construction skills and training. We've established a new retail street, which is actually part of one of Andrew's previous projects for us on Elephant Park, new Sayer Street, and indeed meanwhile use around the retail offering for Elephant Park has been a key part of the success of the project. And we've planted over 1,200 new trees in Zone 1, as I mentioned. Next slide, please, Andrew. And I guess this slide is just trying to hopefully articulate some of the quality ambitions that Lendlease brought to this project. You can see in top left the early phases of the park, you know, fantastic quality of landscaping, and I think, you know, we shouldn't underestimate how successful the landscaping's been in terms of the project as a whole. And along the bottom there, some of the architecture that we've brought to the area, Trafalgar Place by DRMM, which was Sterling shortlisted. The MP1, snappily titled MP1, I'm sure they've got different names, but as Lendlease, we know them as some of the master plan phases. So MP1 Central there, which is a McCrenna Lavington, and that's actually an affordable housing block. So, you know, very handsome building. And then Doug and Morris is Energy Centre, which is adjacent actually to that McCrenna Lavington phase.
Great, thanks, Russ. And so sort of the kind of preamble to talk about New Cooper Point is we worked with Lendlease on Westgrove North, which was part of the second phase, which does actually have the tallest tower within the master plan at 30 stories. This was a mixed tenure in terms of private for sale, but then affordable rent and shared ownership as well. This is an image of Sayer Street, which is the retail street that was created as part of that phase, and some images of the more masonry-led brick buildings that made up that plot. And then this was our design for the tower on that plot, going to 30 stories, which had this cruciform arrangement, which was something that actually came out of Lendlease's brief, with a desire to create 100% dual aspect to all of the accommodation. And this particular floor plate is a mix of 2-bed, 4-person, two one bed, two people and two studios on each floor plate. So this very much sort of served as a starting point for the briefing on New Cooper Point. And these are some images. This completed a couple of years ago now. So if we move across to New Cooper Point, we were sort of tasked with taking the brief from Westgrove North and readapting that for the PRS market. So a lot of research had gone into Lend-Lease developing their brief to move into that part of the residential sector, and that then fed into our design for the tower. In terms of program, we started design, and it is a reserved matters application. So Meg were the master planners for the overall scheme, achieving outline consent, and then we delivered a reserved matters application, which achieved planning in February 2017, and we worked straight through on this project, so through the determination period, and then started on site at pretty much towards the end of that year. Obviously, because the master plan is sort of continually under construction, a lot of the preparatory work had already been done. And then the scheme and the tower was the last part of the overall plot to hand over. It was actually completed in February of this year. As you can imagine, the build process was interrupted by COVID, and there was a period where site was shut, probably for a few months, and then got underway again, albeit working at a slower pace. So the completion date was slightly off what had been kind of intended, but actually, given all of the kind of challenges that the project faced over this period, was actually quite close to the target delivery date. The overall plot has 442 new homes within it, and 184 of those are located in New Cooper Point. So you can see within the kind of overall offer of housing that the tower delivers a very, very significant portion of those within the overall design. New Cooper Point forms part of the third phase of the master plan, and there's two plots, which is Park Central West, which the tower forms part of, and then its sibling located to the east, which is itself just completed this month. So this is a podium level plan showing the two plots next to each other. And you can see the two towers are given sort of space. They're not connected into the lower mansion blocks. And you have this two languages. You have a lighter language of unitized facade for both towers, and then more masonry-led buildings for the mid-rise mansion block components. So this is a straight-on view looking to the park promenade. And what was quite key on both plots was establishing a really strong relationship between the ground plane that was active and kind of forges this relationship to the park. And this is all kind of retail that spills out onto the park. And this is actually starting to become active now, and the building is starting to be occupied. So these were some of the kind of CGIs from planning, and this image starts to show that relationship kind of quite clearly. But as we move up, there's a central podium garden, which is accessible to all of the residents across the three tenures on the plot, and you can see how the tower starts to engage with that. So I'll just hand back to Russ to talk a little bit more about the brief in terms of Lend-Lease's move into the PRS sector.
Yeah, so this New Cooper Point is our first, or part of our first build to rent offering to London. So in many respects, it's intended to sort of set the benchmark for our BTR offer. And we've, spent, I guess, the last 2 to 3 years developing the brand around what our rental offer would be. And I think, it's obviously a very customer centric approach. We're welcoming dogs, quite a lot of differences actually to our typical open market offer, where we perhaps wouldn't encourage dogs, as an example. And that really has manifested itself, particularly in terms of the amenity offer, as with all build to rent assets. So I mean, there's not a huge amount to say other than, if you're looking to rent somewhere, please go along. But I think the proximity, as in zone 1, how close it is to all these kind of key London assets, we're pretty confident it's a great offer. And indeed, as a result of in part the pandemic, we are extending our BTR offering at Elephant Park. So the sister building that Andrew referred to is also going to be significantly build to rent, and indeed the final plot along that New Kent Road, sorry, is also a rental offering that's been designed by HDA. Next slide. I've also just been asked to touch on safety, and particular safety at design. This, for those who have worked with Lendlease, you'll be well aware that this is a very huge priority for the business, and I can speak as the sort of proverbial poacher turned gatekeeper, having worked as an architect with Lendlease as a client across a number of projects, and then coming on board with Lendlease itself. You know, I think Lendlease, in my experience, certainly as an architect, are one of the few developers that kind of walk the walk as well as talk the talk. In terms of how we structure our approach to safety, we have global minimum requirements, the GMRs, which you can see sort of illustrated in front of you, and that really provides a hierarchy of risk management. Next slide, please, Andrew. Within those GMRs, there are obviously a number of key risks which we identify, and within that, some of which are particularly identified as relating to tall buildings, which are listed here, kind of fairly obvious ones, but we have found that by structuring, repeating, and kind of making this something of a mantra, we are, as a culture, I guess, as a corporate culture, a lot more aware of the risks and a lot better able to manage them proactively rather than reactively. Next slide. You know, I guess we use examples, as you would have seen in some of those slides there, of incidents. We share our any safety incidents that happen globally with our consultant teams as an educational mechanism, again, to constantly improve that focus on safety. And in terms of managing those sort of 5 top risks that we identified as associated with tall buildings, one of our preferred approach to manage those risks is by you know, using unitized cladding, frankly, and you know, with obviously all the prefabrication benefits, also the quality benefits, but in terms of access, you know, a key issue for safety in the construction industry at large is scaffold access, temporary works. We seek to eliminate that wherever possible. So I think it's fair to say that was part of our brief, and in certain ways that has driven Andrew's design response. Digital warehouse. So I'll stop talking, you'll be glad to know soon. But I guess part of the safety and design ethos is communicated to our consultant teams through what we call the digital warehouse. So the digital warehouse sits separate from our briefing documents. It's a SharePoint site, so it's a web-based repository of best practice for our residential projects. So it has a range of standardized information that might go from, say, a bathroom pod all the way through to tried and tested apartment layouts. It's important to say that the layouts are not prescriptive, although obviously they do represent you know, a kind of best practice manifestation of our brief, if you like. But the bits that we are keen are standardized are the componentry. So, for example, the bathroom pods, the kitchen types, and there's a sort of a practical driver behind that, which is obviously related to procurement, and it allows us to leverage our pipeline to improve our purchasing, but it's also around quality. You know, we know that every bathroom pod that goes into our projects is this size, this shape, this connection methodology, this sequencing of events. So it allows our construction business, and it's worth saying for those who don't know that Lendlease is an integrated business. So we are vertically integrated in that we cover the whole building life cycle, including construction and asset management. So that, you know, that standardization of approach in componentry in particular allows a greater level of confidence that our construction business will deliver the best quality artifact at the end of the project. It's also worth saying that the digital warehouse itself has evolved kind of in parallel with the Elephant Park master plan in many respects, and Andrew's work and the work of AHMM has been pretty central to that, in terms of developing the content for the digital warehouse and its deployment. But it's also worth saying that it remains very much a live a document. It's not static. It isn't intended to be sort of a museum piece in that these are the only apartment types we ever will deploy. And so, you know, we encourage our designers to sort of challenge us on the digital warehouse and to help us continually improve that that digital warehouse. I think that's. Is there another slide on this? Oh yes. So this slide was really talking to my point around the evolution of the digital warehouse. You can see master plan phases 2 and 3, so H4 and H5. New Cooper's Point is the H4 plot. And you can see there's certainly a kind of family resemblance between these blocks. And I think we're now at the point being open where we're very comfortable with the digital warehouse and the benefits it's brought to our projects. And we're now sort of seeking to, I guess, loosen some of those constraints around the standardized elements, but within, you know, sensible controls.
Great, thanks, Ross. So you can see in terms of the brief that we had, there's sort of 5 key elements within that. The first one being a response to the master plan and all the parameters and design code that were set within that. You know, a very, very strong approach to safety. And, you know, one of the key outcomes of that is trying to maximize off-site manufacture as far as possible. Working within a PRS brief, and I'll talk a bit about the floor plan in a moment, and then also looking at standardization, and that feeds very neatly into the offsite agenda as well. So this is the floor plate for New Cooper Point. So it's 8 flats per core, it's, 25 stories, it's 3 lifts, 1 stair. We'll come on to fire safety a bit later. There are 4 2-bed 4-person apartments. You can see they're arranged here on the corners. And you see that's pretty much kind of north up the page. So this is New Kent Road to the north through there. To the south is the podium garden, but also views out over the rest of the master plan. Because this is PRS, it tends to favour this split arrangement for the apartments. So as you come in through the front door, you might have one person renting in this room. Someone has the master with the ensuite, but it's quite important the relationship between the second bedroom and the bathroom, given that they'll probably be using that the most. Something we felt was really important was achieving a view out. So as you open the front door, you immediately have kind of access to kind of natural light and a vista, and then that takes you into the living dining area. Trying to keep the proportion of these not too square, so you do get a clear kind of kitchen dining zone, and also somewhere that's more kind of living area, and that then breaks out onto the balcony areas. In terms of the 1 beds, they do have this dog leg in them, which, you know, we always try and kind of take out, but there's some quite kind of important reasons for that in this floor plate. One being obviously the relationship to the core onto this side, and then here trying to create some privacy and separation from the front door from the lift waiting area. As I said, this is kind of an evolvement of the tower we'd done in the previous phase. we are trying to achieve a second view for the one-bedroom flats, and that's what gives this quite distinctive layered form to the north and south elevations of the building. And having the second view was really important, but actually gives kind of fantastic daylight and amenity to the living dining rooms for the one-bedroom apartments. As I said, these were all kind of pods through there, so there's quite a detailed exercise to undertake in terms of how you get them all in there and connect them. And we work very closely with Lend-Lease Construction in order to achieve that. You can see kind of coordination with structure, which we'll come on to with Simon a bit later. So that's the floor plate. Within the PRS brief, this does stack all the way up the building. There isn't the same kind of demand within that sector for bigger apartments, and where we do have them, they've been provided within the mansion block. So there is a kind of efficiency of design in terms of keeping the same floor plate running up the building. In terms of designing tall buildings, it's sort of, as a typology, you do find yourself being drawn to kind of overseas references, particularly the States, that kind of golden period in the kind of 60s and 70s of high-rise design, kind of peak of modernism. This is Chicago Civic Center by Mies van der Rohe, and there were a few ideas in here that we started to explore in terms of how to develop them with the floor plate. But I think that the challenge with towers is how to try and create some local resonance within the language that you're using. It's not the same as doing a masonry-led mansion block building, where there's so much to draw on with the kind of rich history of buildings in London. So finding a way of trying to create a link to something local is challenging. On this site, we had this kind of fantastic opportunity. This is the Faraday Memorial that sits at the centre of what used to be Elephant and Castle Roundabout, which was finished in 1961 by Rodney Gordon, working at the LCC. And we were really interested in this, and we did wonder whether there was an opportunity to make a kind of subtle reference to this as a way of trying to tie the tower into its place, particularly the effect of the memorial at night with the traffic passing it by, we thought was kind of particularly enjoyable. And how that could then feed into the construction methodology that we're using, this idea of kind of texture and pressed aluminium as being something that could deliver that. So in terms of the tower, there are kind of 5 key principles that informed the architecture. The first one being strong verticality at the corners. So that's kind of a primary vertical order, and that's something that came from the Mies van der Rohe building. Horizontal bands that are kind of set within that. Within residential, we think it's quite good to have sills to the windows, gives a bit more kind of privacy to the apartments, particularly the bedrooms. An idea about the Faraday Memorial, having some depth and texture to the unitized facade to create this kind of differential in light and reflection across it. There is a horizontal order where we have some fins located at every 4 floors, just to give some grain to the tower as you start to look up it. And then set within the design code of the master plan, an idea that there should be some elaboration at the top of the building, given that's the part that is the most visible from far away. So they're the kind of 5 guiding principles that informed the design of the architecture. These are the longer elevations. This is looking across the 2-bed 4-person. And so you can see the kind of primary vertical order, horizontality sitting within that, and then these recesses within each of the unitized panels, which creates this kind of sense of variety in light and depth across the facade. Horizontal windows running through. Some of these are blanking panels, just in terms of keeping the amount of glazing to the right levels to manage overheating. And then as you shift around to the north and south facades, we have this kind of layering, which is a kind of natural product of the plan. You can see how that starts to work in tandem with the kind of more solid elements, and then the bolt-on balconies holding the corners within there. This is a CGI setback looking from the north, and then looking up the building. As I said, there's an idea about taking the language that we had in the lower levels of the building. Obviously, it's much further away at the top of the building when you're seeing it, so there was a kind of need for greater depth. whereas the panels go in the lower levels. We actually inverted that and made these more three-dimensional and sculptural to the top 4 floors of the building. And then an idea about being able to see the sky through the crown, and sort of drawing on some kind of subtle references from the Chrysler building, with this use of geometry across the top. This was one of the more challenging elements in terms of the build, and we'll come on to that in the kind of detailing and procurement section. This is kind of final CGI along New Kent Road. Equally important is how the tower touches the ground. Again, the master plan sets out very clear provisions that the towers should be read as kind of firmly grounded. So you can see our verticals coming down to kind of touch the ground, and a shift in brief for the lower 2 floors of the building. Entrance lobby located off New Kent Road, an element of retail housed within it, and then a whole floor of amenity provision being provided at first, which has access out onto the podium garden. So this is the ground floor. Airlock located off New Kent Road, lobby, and then with PRS, there's a lot more back of house functions to be accommodated within the building. These are some CGIs of the reception. We work very closely with Lendlease's PRS team to develop the interiors with their team. Amenity being very important in terms of the PRS offer. So we have a large co-working space, a game space, a screening room, a residence room that's kind of bookable for people to have parties, and quite a significant gym, a double height void that links these spaces back down to the entrance reception, and access from all of these spaces out onto the podium garden. This is some of the internals of these. It's all finished now. I think one of the kind of outcomes of COVID, that's not always completely easy to get back into the buildings when you've done them. In terms of specification, structure, which we'll kind of come on to, unitized aluminium cladding, which is a metallic powder coated finish. The balconies were all off-site fabricated, steel frame, bolt-on with glazed balustrading. The rest of the internal fit out relatively standard within this kind of sector, so dry lining, pre-manufactured bathroom ensuite pods, and also the utility pods that drive the MVHR and heating and water were all off-site manufactured as well. We worked very closely with Lendlease's digital design team in terms of the delivery of this, and actually a lot of the subcontractors were also starting to feed into the BIM model that we developed, and this shows some of the different elements within the model that go into the combined coordinated outcome. So I'll just hand over to Simon just to talk a little bit about the structural design of the tower.
Thanks, Andrew. When a structural engineer approaches the design of a tall building, they are particularly interested in the choice and location of the stability system to resist high wind loads, which is the key influencer in the design here in the UK. Also important is how it's built and whether the design of the building can influence or be influenced by the methodology and sequence of build. As with any project, sustainability and value targets are important. Here we want to drive out waste. And we do that by making the core as efficient as possible, minimizing the number of columns and walls, squeezing the thickness of the structural slab to reduce the overall floor zone and create as many floors within the maximum parameters, and challenge proposals where columns or walls change on plan, which would require transfer systems. Introducing an element of rationalization into the design also creates further simplicity and value. The success of any project is underpinned by effective communication between all stakeholders, a respect and understanding of design inputs and procedures, and harnessing tools such as BIM, which was just discussed, or an electronic file sharing platform to provide a single source of truth. Next slide. Okay, starting with the foundations, we arrived at a tailored piled foundation solution. Our proposed new piles were positioned to miss the existing piles of the former Haygate estate building, shown by the orange circles in the image on the left. Due to insufficient pile capacity, we decided not to reuse these piles. We did, however, exploit the good bearing capacity of the upper gravels, shown in blue in the central soil profile, to support the self-weight of the cap. This reduced the pile numbers by around about 10%. Preliminary pile testing improved our confidence in the ground and generated a reduction in pile lengths, and optimized soil structure interaction studies allowed us to locate piles where they were only needed. So overall, this approach generated reduced muck away, reduced vehicles to and from site, reduced site waste, and reduced total volume in the concrete used in the piles. Next slide. The core. Getting the core right at the early design stage is paramount. Everything else then generally falls into place. It needs full collaborative working from the design team. It may be dictated to some extent by the client brief, as outlined by Andrew earlier, or site constraints, but this structural backbone to the building also captures access and corridor layout, vertical transportation, risers, service routing, a lot of stuff. As the structural engineer, we need to ensure that the core geometry, configuration, and location, and any connecting elements connecting different parts of the core all work to produce a solution where core wall thicknesses are reduced, thereby improving the net to gross. Next slide. Continuing with the efficient core design, wind tunnel tests considered the effects from neighboring buildings. Test results were generally found to be less than the values obtained from the more conservative Eurocode approach and were considered when determining the thickness and rebar content for the stability core walls. Next slide. Columns. We position columns within party or partition wall lines and on a grid which permits flexibility of use. We reduce the number of columns as much as possible, but need to keep an eye on the spans between columns so that we don't penalize the slab thickness. Obviously, all this helps in reducing cycle time between floors. Continuous columns are the ideal. This negates the need for transfers, which again promotes strong cycle times or short cycle times. Even the orientation of columns, such as perimeter columns, can help facilitate in future construction operations, such as simplifying the connection of cladding. The position of columns must also consider the installation paths of large elements, such as pods. That was again described by Andrew earlier. And another area to watch out for is the column axial shortening, which when not addressed fully can lead to cracking in slabs. Next slide. So initial positioning of columns is carried out by using one's knowledge and experience of design. To test whether this is the optimum solution requires analysis. In blue are the columns which we have asked the analysis program to move along the permitted zones. These are the party walls shown in green. So to arrive at an optimum solution, we ask the program to run thousands of analyses where each analysis is a unique configuration of these blue columns. Next slide. A digital design approach using proprietary geometry and structural analysis software, as well as in-house coding, allows us to explore many alternative designs in a relatively short period of time. The image on the left was our initial design using experience. The image in the middle shows the optimization process, and the optimum design, shown on the right, captures the final design whereby we reduce the rebar in the slab by around about 10%. Next slide. BIM. BIM is used as a single source of truth. At any given time, stakeholders can observe how mature the design is in terms of its level of detail and level of coordination. A good BIM execution plan is essential. It outlines the expectation of design quality, the regime of model updating, and workshops to resolve clashes. BIM info was also used here on the project for tech-offs by the QS team, where bolt-on applications such as Ribeye 2 were used. Next slide. Communicating our design in terms of its impact on the environment has never been more important. Using BIM information, we can present our designs in terms of embodied carbon and use this information to compare against other designs using different structural materials and our other projects. Next slide. Yeah, the final frame design used precast concrete columns. This componentized form of modern methods of construction created a better quality finish, a tidier, cleaner site, and a more accurate construction program. The core for the tower was constructed using in-situ concrete and jump formed. And on the right-hand side, you can see steel balconies. They were also fabricated off-site and hoisted in place with the balustrades and handrails all in place. The type of balcony used offered a novel glide-on installation technique, which improved safety standards and generated rapid speed installation times. Next slide.
Great, thanks, Simon. Just very quickly, in terms of fire safety, clearly over the kind of delivery phase of this project, the Grenfell tragedy occurred. So sort of midway through the design, we did undertake a kind of full review of the fire strategy. And this was actually driven by Lend-Lease, is that they wanted to get into a position where they'd be confident that it would comply with the regs going forward, not just the regs at the time. In terms of the other elements, is relatively standard, but the key thing was trying to remove really as much kind of potentially combustible material out of the facade and indeed the whole build. So we literally went through kind of each package, looking at what we could take out to try and get this building future-proofed in regard to fire safety. In terms of sustainability, so the building really needs to be kind of understood in the context of the overall master plan, particularly the energy strategy around the CHP and energy hub. There's a strong focus on biodiversity, on facade performance. We'll come on to some details within the facade. I mean, on these kind of larger mixed plots where you have a tower and you have a mid-rise building, there is a kind of blending of performance between the mid-rise elements, where it is easier to get a higher performing facade than on the tower, but that's something that certainly for project going forward, we'll be looking at really getting the tower into the best position possible. As I touched on, we wanted to maximize dual aspect, which allows for cross ventilation through the flats, which helps to offset any issues in terms of overheating. It is a kind of legacy of the master plan that we did have to achieve Code for Sustainable Homes level 4, and it sits within Lend-Lease's overall ambition for the master plan to be climate positive by 2025, and we can kind of come back to that a bit later. At AHMM, we also run our own kind of scorecard in terms of sustainability, and there were some areas where this project did very well in terms of renewables, getting to a good position in terms of performance, operational energy. It's very well located in terms of transport. I think there are areas, if we're doing it again, that we'd like to focus more on, I think particularly around the kind of embodied energy piece. So just quickly touch on the kind of facade design, and we'll try and leave some time for questions. So this is the kind of performance values that came out of the sustainability strategy, and I've put some extracts from our design intent drawings, which is what we produced for tender. The way the procurement was run, we produced these. There was then 3 subcontractors who tendered with intent to undertake most of their design, some of it pre-tender, which they submitted, and then having a PCSA and then into full design of the rest of the system. So we'll touch on FKN and kind of their approach to design a bit later. In terms of performance, Nisha, I don't know if you want to kind of provide some context in terms of how this is sitting with kind of projects across Lend-Lease's portfolio.
Absolutely. I think the really important thing, and we've already touched on the benefits of off-site construction and safety. I think the very important thing is early on in the design, all the other elements have to be designed to take that on board. So, for example, Simon's structure had to have certain deflection limits. Very important to get those designed in very early on. The standard structural code will often be too loose in that respect. I think also, as you said, the wind loads are also incredibly important for tall buildings, and it is really vital to get the wind tunnel test carried out early on and to understand where the cladding loads are. So really, I think those are 2 key points, Andrew, that I'd like to pick up in respect of performance.
Great. So this is some further extracts from parts of the building from our design intent. So you can see the level of detail that we're taking it to before handing over to the subcontractor to undertake their kind of full and detailed design. This is one of the balcony interfaces. And then this is FKN picking up that design and then taking it through to the position of producing assembly drawings that show all the elements and how they come together. Again, this is some of our details. Sorry about that. showing the kind of cross sections through the panels. And one of the challenges on the project was about the relationship between our horizontal bands and our slab position. Now, the best place to put your kind of what's called the stack joint, which is where the vertical panels stack on top of each other with each floor spanning slab to slab, is as close to the slab as possible. But you can see our stack joint was actually located quite far from that. So it's quite a lot of detailed kind of engineering went into designing the bracketry in order to achieve that, but also thinking about the assembly sequence in order to get those in safely. Great, and you can see this is one of their details, taking our design intent and putting all the things that you need in it in terms of fixing. This is a particularly tricky detail, which is the interface with the MVHR, which is the whole house ventilation system for the apartments. And this is where you're bringing together the work of a number of different subcontractors in terms of dry lining, mechanical, and the facade contractor themselves. What was particularly complicated on this project was where these were located is also where you're starting to try and attach the balconies on, and the balcony connectors then also have to be coordinated with the post-tension structural tendons. So there's a lot of detail coordination went into this particular part of the design. The crown that I touched on, and one of the key challenges here is obviously the panels are spanning quite some distance beyond the roof slab. So there was a need to design a secondary steel frame to sit behind that. That's being installed directly against the edge of the slab. So some very careful work done in terms of sequencing and assembly to make sure that that could be done safely. And this is FKN's detailed drawings showing how all of that started to go together.
Sorry, Andrew, can I actually just add one thing? I think it's so important when you've got the complexities of the facade, as you showed with the MVHR, the balconies, the crown, the benefits of having a PCSA early on with a contractor, so that we can actually all work the details together. So the fabrication, the manufacturing fabrication is far smoother, and obviously the installation can be agreed very early on.
And this is some of the detailing at the top. Obviously, the interface between the kind of parapet and waterproofing detail and our kind of elements flying past the roof were also needed some kind of very, very detailed kind of attention. You can see that there. This was the visual mock-up that we had produced, just in terms to look at some of the interfaces and present to the planners. This is sort of a kind of hybrid of different elements of the building brought together. This was done on site. We met with Southwark, and there was also a performance mock-up that was built off-site to undertake some of the air tightness and wind and hose testing, which is an important part of the performance specification produced by Windtech. So you can see here, this is some of the kind of the wind testing and then the hose testing that gets carried out on the performance mock-up. And then onto assembly. So you can see this is the panels starting to be put in, all of the balcony stubs pre-assembled. And again, this is one of the more challenging installation details. These are already on there and you have to kind of maneuver your panels around them as carefully as you can. And then actually this is one of the details where there is a bit more kind of manual work just to fix that up once you've slid them over. The benefit of unitized facade, you can get really high installation rates in terms of their ability to install them at a great pace across the scheme. So it did really start to take shape very quickly. You can see them kind of moving up the building as we go. And just a few kind of final shots of the tower, quite keen to leave some time for questions. So as I said, this finished earlier this year. This is some of the kind of final photography, and you can see some of the details around the crown and what we're able to achieve through there. So thank you very much. And yeah, hopefully we can help to answer some of the questions people might have.
Very good. Well, thank you very much, Andrew. And yes, please do put any questions you might have into the Q&A box. Perhaps I could just ask, when you're looking at the layouts and design of towers like this, what are the sort of key considerations you take into account if for PRS schemes? Does that make a great difference in?
Yep. I think the main one in terms of the tower, the sort of a distinction between PRS, which is where a relatively standard residential product is being made available for rent, and build to rent, which tends to have more specific features that you might see in kind of renting, and that's sort of the dumbbell apartment that we don't have in the kind of tower. The key one was the split bedroom in the two beds, but also looking at making sure we're getting high levels of storage, and it's sort of thinking about, if you're going to live there as sharers, what are some of the things that you want to see. So that was the main driver within the tower floor plate that responded to the brief, but I think also just the high level of standardization. Then there was a lot of thought goes into the internal specification as well, because, you know, as the kind of PRS operator, you're the one who has to replace the floors and the doors and everything else. So there's quite a lot of thinking about usage, lifespan, damage, replacement strategy for all of the internal fit out as well. Russ, I don't know if you've got any other kind of thoughts on PRS from a client perspective.
I mean, it's a debate. It's a topic that's debated often, pretty globally, actually, within Lend-Lease. But fundamentally, we don't actually. In terms of our product definition, they are very, very, very similar. The big departure being the one that Andrew's mentioned around bedroom location. You know, our for sale product would often co-locate the bedrooms around a sort of bathroom cluster. So that's the only, in terms of the apartments themselves, that's the main departure. As Andrew said, specifications would certainly be different based on different criteria for selection.
Great, thank you. Well, Ross, perhaps I could stay with you. I mean, you talked a bit about life cycle and asset management. So Lend-Lease, you know, we'll be looking after the whole estate, you know, as far into the future as you can see, and in terms of maintaining it, is that how it will work?
Yeah, that's certainly the plan. Our rental portfolio is probably the largest, our largest foray into that world of sort of, you know, retaining the assets, and that's certainly you know, forced us to kind of, I guess, develop more tools. I wouldn't say it's necessarily changed the way we approach the projects, but it's certainly focused our attention on providing better tools to manage those buildings in the future through post-occupancy evaluation, and increasingly the use of digital twin, you know, to enable preemptive maintenance regimes. But yeah, I think, you know, the park itself is a huge asset for the regeneration. I mean, I don't know if you've been down there lately. Obviously travel is a little bit restricted, but I was lucky enough to go down there as part of the inspection regime prior to completion on New Cooper Point, and it's, you know, it's incredible. It's really amazing, and I think it will have the same sort of transformative role that perhaps the Olympic Park has had on Stratford. And so, you know, maintenance of that is absolutely mission critical to the success of the spaces, the success of the F&B offer, you know, the active frontages that Andrew mentioned. So yeah, we kind of completely understand that, and you know, have taken that approach from the outset.
So do you have a digital twin of the whole estate? Will the whole estate be managed using technology like that?
No, so I mean, in the UK, we're probably a little bit at the beginning of our digital twin journey. So we tend to be using them for very specific use cases. We obviously have a very sophisticated BIM model of the plots, which, you know, Andrew and Simon have sort of helped us to co-author with our supply chain. But we're working on a sort of new platform, a new digital platform where we will generate our digital twins from the outset. So in the interim, we are looking at specific use cases, like, for example, preemptive maintenance, and developing a digital twin around those specific building systems. So it's not a full model, and at the moment it's going to be restricted to those assets, the building assets that we will manage.
Thanks. Now there's a question in the box of you mentioned procurement. What was the contract form?
I should probably cover that one as well. So as I mentioned, we're a vertically integrated business, but the sort of form of contract is a bespoke design and build contract, but there's some pretty interesting departures from the normal D&B contract. So firstly, that we don't novate until PC. So the consultant team would be effectively employed by Lend-Lease Development all the way through, and it's more about a liability transfer than a risk transfer, if you like. It's just an administrative exercise. And there's also a shared pain and gain mechanism. I mean, I'm an architect by training, so numbers are not necessarily my strong point either. I don't understand the complexities of them, but in simple terms, that's just between different parts of the business. So it's been we found it's a successful way in, even within a sort of corporate entity, overcoming any of that historic sort of confrontational contractual basis. It's a much more open dialogue, and obviously, there's a shared interest in delivering the project in the best possible way, particularly, as you said, with the asset management drivers also in the frame here.
Now, Simon in the audience has asked, one of the hot topics being discussed with tall buildings design at the moment is partition creep. Was this something that was considered during the design construction? And if so, how? Is that one for you, Simon?
We didn't have any issues with partition creep. I think at the time when we were doing our design, there was a lot of discussion over other noises, particularly service ducts in tall buildings, and the whistling or the creaking that occurs from those. So there was studies carried out, but not in terms of partitions, lightweight partitions. No.
I mean, most of the buildings where that's sort of been encountered are much taller than kind of 25 stories where we see it. I think you've just at that level got quite a bit of stiffness and not the kind of excessive wind loads. I mean, there are some subtleties around the detailing of the dry lining about interfaces and not having kind of partition studs directly up against columns, because that's when you do start to get some issues with that. So yes, it was considered. I can see another kind of question there from Andrew Tong, so I'll just kind of pick that up at the same time. So in terms of the facade design, it was very much part of the brief that we would investigate the use of a unitized.
Tell people what the question is if they.
Oh, sorry. Yes. Was the envelope designed with unitized facade as a given, or were a range of construction methods evaluated to deliver the consented scheme? So I'll answer that one first. So yes, it was a given. I mean, we were told, you can go and look at other things, but you need to be able to build it safely and quickly, and for it to perform very well at a kind of high quality facade in terms of performance. So that does really lend you down the unitized route. So we were taking that as part of the brief to deliver a design against that outline consent. In terms of cost and program, because I mean, it is pretty much the fastest way to build the facade on a tower. So, there were clear advantages to doing it in that way. We didn't undertake an assessment against kind of other methodology. I mean, any kind of traditional scaffolded approach is simply not acceptable at that height. And then what were the per square meter facade and build costs achieved? I might let Lend-Lease answer that one.
One of the reasons we actually do a PCSA is also so that we can keep control of the costs. So that's also a very important part of that. I'm afraid I don't have the cost per square meter, but unitized is more expensive than, say, a stick system, but you wouldn't scaffold a building that high for that. And you've really got to take into account the fact that the unitized facade, you're saving so much time on program. Each panel could go in within 20 minutes. So you have to weigh up those against that. But obviously we have a set cost plan, and we use the PCSA to ensure that we're keeping as close to the cost plan as possible. Hopefully.
I think very roughly it was about £1,000 a square meter, somewhere in that order. The facade for the tower did actually come in under budget when it was tendered.
Thank you.
Great. Okay. Well, we are up to time now. So thank you very much to everyone who's listening, and thank you very much for the team for giving such a fascinating and detailed explanation of this particular building. It's really important, I think, to share these skills and competency across the profession. So thank you very much indeed. And so I just warn our audience now, there's a little poll coming up on your screen shortly. We'd be very grateful if you filled that in, because it does help us make sure we keep our program on track and deliver a sort of program you want to watch. But thank you for being here, and thank you again to our speakers. Bye.
Thank you, Peter. Cheers. Bye.